You are on HOA consequences. The tow hook was inches away. I am calling security right now. That is what Melissa Baker screamed at me, while waving a handwritten log like it was a legal document, insisting that handwritten logs outranked everything else. She stood on the sidewalk by the mailbox cluster, her gray windbreaker snapping in the breeze, her white baseball cap tilted at an angle that somehow made her look even more unhinged. I held my phone up, recording every word, and kept my voice calm. The metal clipboard in her other hand slammed onto the top of the mailbox with a crack that made a passing jogger flinch. I live in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, at the Villas at Lakeview Landing Association, a community where the board claims the rules are clear, but will not show you the page. I am a safety compliance officer who writes incident reports for a living, so staying calm while chaos erupts is basically my job description. But this was different. This was not a workplace accident or a safety audit. This was Melissa Baker, social committee chair, holding a violation notice with my address on it and a deadline that had already passed, even though I had never received the original notice. She kept saying the same thing over and over. This is not a fence. It is an encroachment. I had no fence. I had a small decorative trellis at the edge of my patio, the kind you buy at a garden center for $40. It had been there when I moved in 6 months ago. A week earlier, a neighbor named Greg had pulled me aside at the mail kiosk and told me something that stuck with me. He said a prior homeowner, a guy named Tom Rutherford, had fought the HOA over a bogus fine 3 years ago, and then moved suddenly. Greg said Tom had proof the board was backdating notices to collect late fees, but Tom left town before he could do anything with it. Greg looked over his shoulder when he said it, like he was worried someone might hear. That conversation was still fresh in my mind when Melissa showed up with her clipboard and her handwritten log, screaming about encroachments and deadlines. I asked her to show me the original notice. She said it had been sent certified mail 2 weeks ago. I asked for the tracking number. She said she did not have it on her, but it was in the files. I asked which files. She said the association records, and I could request them through the portal. I asked why she was here right now if the process was supposed to go through the portal. She did not answer. She just kept tapping the clipboard with one finger, and the sound was like a metronome counting down to something bad. The thing is, I knew this was not about a trellis. I had been feeling it for weeks. Small things. A gate access card that stopped working one morning, then worked again the next day. An email reminder about trash cans that mentioned a prior violation I had never received. A maintenance worker who told me someone from the board had been asking about my car and my work schedule. When Greg told me about Tom Rutherford, it all clicked into place. I was being set up the same way Tom had been, and I needed to figure out why before it destroyed my life. My job is strict about attendance. I work nights as a safety compliance officer at a manufacturing plant, and if I miss a shift without coverage, I am done. No second chances. The HOA knew that. Melissa knew that. A tow threat at the wrong time could cost me my career, and that made me vulnerable. I could feel the pressure building every time I got a new notice or a new email with a deadline I had never heard of before. Melissa stepped closer, and I could see the key ring on her belt loop. It had at least 20 keys on it, maybe more, jingling with every movement like she was a jailer. She said the board had scheduled an emergency compliance hearing for me in 3 days. I asked what the emergency was. She said repeated violations and failure to respond. I said I had not violated anything, and I had not received anything to respond to. She said the log proved otherwise, and she tapped the clipboard again. I took a breath and asked to see the log. She angled it away from me and said it was board property. I said if it was evidence against me, I had a right to see it. She said I could see it at the hearing. I said that was not how due process worked. She smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made my stomach drop. She said, "Go ahead and call whoever you want. I have a committee for that." That line. I made a mental note to remember it, because I had a feeling it was going to matter later. A car pulled up, and a man in a reflective vest got out. He was one of the maintenance crew, and he stood near the curb watching us but not saying anything. Melissa glanced at him, then back at me. She said the trellis had to be removed by end of day tomorrow, or the association would remove it and bill me for labor. I said I wanted to see the covenant section that prohibited decorative trellises. She said it was in the Architectural Guidelines, Section 4. I said I had read Section 4, and it said nothing about trellises. She said I must have an old version. I asked when the guidelines had been updated. She said 2 years ago. I asked where I could get the new version. She said the portal. I said the portal only had the original covenants from 2018. She said that was my problem, not hers. I had a shift starting in 6 hours, and I needed to sleep before then. But I also needed to figure out what was happening. I went home and opened the HOA portal on my laptop. I searched for architectural guidelines. The only document that came up was the 2018 version, the one I had already read. I clicked on the meeting minutes archive. There were minutes posted for every month going back to 2019, except for 3 months in 2022. Those months were just missing. No files, no notes, nothing. I opened the compliance section of the portal and looked at my account. There were 2 notices listed. One was for the trellis, dated 2 weeks ago. The other was for trash cans left out past noon, dated 4 weeks ago. I had never received either notice. I checked my email spam folder. Nothing. I checked my mailbox records with the post office. No certified mail in the past 2 months. I called my friend Claire, a property manager who had dealt with HOA drama at her own communities for years. I told her what was happening. She said it sounded like selective enforcement, and she said the missing meeting minutes were a red flag. She said if Melissa was backdating notices, there would be a pattern, and I needed to find other victims. She also said I should file a records request immediately to force the board to produce the certified mail receipts and the updated guidelines. I drafted a records request and submitted it through the portal. The system gave me a confirmation number and said I would receive a response within 10 business days. I took a screenshot of the confirmation screen, because at this point I was not trusting anything to stay in the system. That night at work, I kept thinking about Tom Rutherford. Greg had said Tom moved suddenly, but he had not said where or why. I pulled up the county property records on my phone during a break. Tom had sold his house in August 2022, right in the middle of one of those missing months. The sale price was lower than comparable homes in the neighborhood, like he had been in a hurry to get out. I texted Greg and asked if he knew how to reach Tom. He said Tom had moved to Spokane, and he thought Tom still had the old paperwork somewhere. He said he would ask around. The next morning, I got an email from the HOA portal. It said my records request had been closed due to insufficient detail. I opened the portal and looked at my request history. The request I had submitted the night before was gone. In its place was a request dated 3 days earlier, asking for meeting minutes from 2019. I had never submitted that request. I took screenshots of everything and called Claire. She said someone had access to my portal account and was tampering with it. She said I needed to change my password immediately and file a complaint with the management company. I changed the password, logged out, and logged back in. The fake request was still there, and my real request was still gone. I called the management company and got a front desk clerk who said the association was self-managed and they only handled financials. I asked who had admin access to the portal. She said the board president and the secretary. I asked who the board president was. She said Melissa Baker. That was the moment I realized this was not just about a trellis. This was about control. Melissa had access to the portal, access to the records, and access to a system that let her rewrite history whenever she wanted. If she could delete my records request and replace it with a fake one, she could do the same thing to violations, payments, meeting minutes, anything. And if she had done it to me, she had probably done it to Tom Rutherford too. I called Greg again and asked if Tom had ever mentioned the portal. Greg said Tom had complained that his requests kept getting lost, and he had started sending everything by certified mail just to have proof. I asked if Tom had kept copies. Greg said he thought so, and he would try to reach Tom that afternoon. I went outside to check the trellis. It was still there, looking completely harmless. A maintenance worker was trimming hedges 2 houses down, and I walked over to talk to him. I asked if he had ever been asked to remove trellises or other decorations. He said no, and he said most of the violations he dealt with were for trash cans or cars parked the wrong way. I asked if he had ever seen Melissa give anyone a hard time. He looked around, then said she once threatened to have him fired because he would not move a car that was legally parked in a guest spot. He said she claimed it was her spot, but it was not. He said he stayed out of it after that. I thanked him and went back inside. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Greg. He said he had reached Tom, and Tom still had the paperwork. Tom said he would scan it and send it to me, but he warned me to be careful. He said Melissa had tried to ruin him, and she would try to ruin me too. That afternoon, I got an email with a zip file attached. Inside were scanned copies of violation notices, meeting minutes, certified mail receipts, and a spreadsheet Tom had made tracking the dates. The spreadsheet showed a pattern. Every notice Tom had received was backdated by at least 2 weeks, and the late fees were calculated from the backdated date, not the date he actually received the notice. The certified mail receipts showed the notices were mailed on the same day Tom received them, which meant the association had lied about the mailing dates. But the most damaging document was a meeting minutes packet from July 2022. The minutes showed a vote to waive late fees for 3 homeowners, including one named Sandra Voss. I did not recognize the name, but I recognized the address. It was Melissa's address. She had voted to waive her own late fees while enforcing them against Tom. I printed everything and put it in a binder. I also saved digital copies to 3 different cloud accounts because I was not taking any chances. Then I called Claire and told her what I had found. She said I had enough to file a formal complaint with the Washington State Attorney General, since HOAs in Idaho and Washington are both subject to oversight for fraud. She also said I should bring the evidence to the hearing and see if Melissa would lie under pressure. If you are enjoying this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more real HOA nightmares. The hearing was scheduled for Saturday morning at 10 in the community clubhouse. I showed up 15 minutes early with my binder, my phone fully charged, and a small audio recorder in my pocket. Claire offered to come with me as a witness, and I said yes. Melissa was already there, sitting at a folding table with 2 other board members. One was an older man I had seen around the neighborhood, and the other was a woman in her 50s who looked uncomfortable. Melissa had her metal clipboard in front of her, and her key ring was on the table, jingling every time she shifted in her seat. She looked at me and said the hearing was for residents only, so Claire would have to leave. I said Claire was my witness, and the covenants allowed witnesses at hearings. Melissa said the bylaws had been updated. I said, show me the updated bylaws. She said they were in the files. I opened my binder and pulled out a printed copy of the bylaws. I said the bylaws I had were dated 2019, and they explicitly allowed witnesses. I asked when the bylaws had been updated. She said last year. I asked for the meeting minutes where the update was approved. She said they were in the archive. I said I had checked the archive, and there were no minutes for 3 months in 2022. I asked if those were the months when the bylaws were updated. Her face went red. She said the missing minutes were a technical issue. I said a technical issue that deleted 3 months of records sounded like a pretty big problem. The older man on the board looked at Melissa and asked if that was true. She said it was being worked on. I pulled out Tom Rutherford's spreadsheet and handed copies to all 3 board members. I said the spreadsheet showed a pattern of backdated notices and fabricated late fees, and I said Tom had been forced to sell his house because of it. I said I believed the same thing was happening to me. Melissa said Tom was a liar, and the spreadsheet was fake. I pulled out the certified mail receipts and handed those over too. I said the receipts proved the notices were mailed on the same day Tom received them, which meant the mailing dates on the notices were false. The uncomfortable woman on the board looked at the receipts and then at Melissa. She asked if the association had been backdating notices. Melissa said the dates were correct and the receipts were wrong. I said I had one more document. I pulled out the meeting minutes from July 2022, the ones showing Melissa had voted to waive her own late fees. I said Melissa was using selective enforcement to target residents she did not like while protecting herself and her friends. I said that was fraud, and it was illegal. Melissa stood up and said the hearing was over. I said the hearing was not over until the board made a decision. The older man said he wanted to see the portal logs to verify when the records request was submitted and deleted. Melissa said the portal logs were confidential. He said if they were confidential, the board could review them in executive session. She said that was not necessary. The uncomfortable woman said she thought we should pause the hearing and get a neutral third party to review the evidence. Melissa said that was not in the bylaws. I said it was in the covenants, Section 12, under dispute resolution. I pulled out another printed page and handed it over. The section said any resident could request a neutral hearing officer if there was a conflict of interest, and the board had to honor the request. Melissa's face went from red to purple. She said I was disrupting the process. I said I was following the process and she was the one trying to bypass it. The older man said he agreed with the other board member and they needed to bring in a neutral hearing officer. Melissa said she would not allow it. He said she did not have unilateral authority. She said as board president, she did. Claire, who had been standing near the door, spoke up. She said under Idaho HOA law, a board president cannot override a majority vote of the board. She said if 2 out of 3 board members wanted a neutral hearing officer, that was a majority, and Melissa had to comply. Melissa turned to Claire and told her to shut up. Claire said she was a property manager and she knew the law. Melissa said she did not care. The older man stood up and said he was voting to suspend the hearing and appoint a neutral hearing officer. The uncomfortable woman said she seconded the motion. Melissa said the vote was invalid. The older man said it was not, and he was calling the management company to notify them. Melissa grabbed her clipboard and stormed out of the room, her key ring jangling like a tambourine. I took the notice without flinching, because I knew what it would trigger. That was exactly what I thought when Melissa handed me a new violation notice on her way out the door. The notice said I had 24 hours to remove the trellis or face a $500 fine. She left it on the table and walked out before I could say anything. Claire looked at the notice and said Melissa was panicking. She said people who panic make mistakes. And Melissa had just made a big one by issuing a new notice in front of witnesses after the hearing was suspended. The older man, whose name I learned was Bill, said he was going to document everything and send it to the management company. He apologized to me and said he had not realized how bad things had gotten. I asked Bill if he knew anything about the missing meeting minutes. He said he had been on the board for less than a year, and he had assumed the minutes were missing because of a software glitch. He said Melissa handled all the portal administration, and no one else had access. I said that was the problem. He said he agreed, and he was going to push for an audit. The uncomfortable woman, whose name was Janet, said she had been feeling uneasy about Melissa for months. She said Melissa had pushed through several votes without proper notice, and Janet had gone along with it because she did not want to cause conflict. She said she regretted that now. I said it was not too late to fix it. I went home and waited. I did not remove the trellis. I figured if Melissa wanted to escalate, I would let her, because every escalation gave me more evidence. That night, I got a call from Greg. He said Melissa had been going around the neighborhood telling people I was a troublemaker and I was trying to take over the board. He said most people did not believe her, but a few were asking questions. I said that was fine. I said the more attention this got, the better. The next morning, I got an email from the management company. It said the board had voted to appoint a neutral hearing officer, and my case would be rescheduled within 2 weeks. It also said the compliance hearing from the previous day was nullified, and any notices issued during or after that hearing were void. I saved the email and forwarded it to Claire. But Melissa was not done. That afternoon, I came home from running errands and found a notice on my door. It said my amenities access had been suspended pending resolution of the compliance case. I checked my gate card, and it did not work. I called the management company, and the clerk said the suspension was ordered by the board president. I said the board had voted to nullify the case. She said she would look into it. An hour later, I got a call from Bill. He said Melissa had locked him and Janet out of the portal. He said he tried to log in to reverse the amenities suspension, and his password did not work. He said he called Melissa, and she told him the portal was down for maintenance. He said he did not believe her. I said neither did I. I called Claire and told her Melissa was escalating. Claire said Melissa was trying to isolate me and make my life miserable so I would give up or move. She said it was a classic intimidation tactic, and the best response was to document everything and stay calm. I said I was documenting everything, but staying calm was getting harder. That night, I was sitting on my patio when I heard footsteps. I looked up and saw Melissa walking past my house with her phone out, recording me. I did not say anything. I just pulled out my own phone and started recording her. She stopped and said I was violating her privacy. I said we were both in a public space, and I had the same right to record as she did. She said I was harassing her. I said she was the one who walked onto my property line. She said I was lying. I stood up and calmly narrated what was happening. I said, "It is 8:43 on a Tuesday night, and Melissa Baker, the HOA president, is standing on the sidewalk in front of my house, recording me without my consent, while accusing me of harassing her. I said, "I am recording this interaction for my own protection." She said I was making a scene. I said she was the one who walked over here with a phone. A neighbor across the street came outside and asked if everything was okay. Melissa said everything was fine, and I was being dramatic. The neighbor looked at me and asked if I needed anything. I said I was okay, and I appreciated him checking. He said to let him know if I needed help. Melissa walked away, still recording. The next day, I got a text from Greg. He said Tom Rutherford wanted to talk to me. I called Tom, and he told me his story. He said Melissa had targeted him after he questioned a fee increase at a board meeting. He said she started issuing violation notices for things that were not violations, and when he tried to fight back, she backdated the notices to make it look like he had been ignoring them for weeks. He said he filed a complaint with the management company, and they told him it was a board matter. He said he hired a lawyer, but the lawyer said it would cost more to fight than it would to just sell the house and move. So that is what he did. Tom said he regretted not fighting harder. He said Melissa had been doing this for years, and no one had been able to stop her because she controlled the records and the portal. He said if I had proof she was tampering with the portal, I might be able to take her down. I said I was working on it. I asked Tom if he knew anyone else Melissa had targeted. He said there was a woman named Linda Chen who had been fined for having the wrong color mailbox. He said Linda paid the fine and repainted the mailbox, but Melissa kept issuing new fines for other things until Linda stopped going to board meetings. He said Linda still lived in the neighborhood, and she might be willing to talk. I found Linda's address in the HOA directory and knocked on her door that evening. She opened the door and looked nervous when I introduced myself. I told her I was fighting a bogus violation, and I was trying to find other people Melissa had targeted. Linda said she did not want to get involved. I said I understood, but I asked if she still had any of the notices or correspondence. She said she might, and she would look. 2 days later, Linda called me. She said she found the notices, and she wanted to meet. We met at a coffee shop outside the neighborhood. She handed me a folder with 6 violation notices, all dated within a 3-month period. The notices were for things like a lawnmower left on the driveway for 2 hours, a recycling bin placed on the wrong side of the house, and a potted plant on the front porch that was not pre-approved. Linda said she had tried to comply with every notice, but Melissa kept finding new things to cite her for. She said she gave up after the 6th notice because she could not afford to keep paying fines. I looked at the dates on the notices. They were all from late 2021, right before the 3 missing months in 2022. I asked Linda if she had ever filed a complaint. She said she tried, but her complaint disappeared from the portal. I said the same thing had happened to me. She said she was scared Melissa would retaliate if she spoke up again. I said I understood, but I asked if she would be willing to testify if it came to that. She said she would think about it. I added Linda's notices to my binder. The pattern was clear. Melissa was using the portal to fabricate violations, backdate notices, and delete complaints. She was doing it to anyone who questioned her authority, and she was getting away with it because no one else had access to the records. I needed to prove the portal tampering, and the only way to do that was to get the portal logs. Bill had said the management company handled the financials, so I called them and asked if they kept backup logs of portal activity. The clerk said they did not have access to the portal logs, but the software company might. She gave me the name of the company, and I called them. The software company said they kept logs for 90 days, but they could only release them to the board president or with a court order. I asked if they could confirm whether any records had been deleted in the past 90 days. The rep said he could not give me specific information, but he could tell me that admin-level deletions were flagged in the system. I asked what that meant. He said if an admin deleted something, it showed up as a red flag in the audit log. He said the board president would be able to see those flags if she logged into the admin panel. I thanked him and hung up. Then I called Bill and told him what I had learned. He said he was going to demand access to the admin panel at the next board meeting. I said the next board meeting was 2 weeks away, and Melissa could delete more evidence by then. He said he would try to call an emergency meeting. That night, my phone battery died at the worst possible moment. I had been recording an interaction with Melissa at the mailbox cluster when my phone shut off. She had been yelling at me about the trellis again, and I had just asked her to show me the certified mail receipt for the original notice. She had refused, and I had started recording. Then the screen went black. I went home and charged my phone, but I was frustrated. I had missed the end of the interaction, and I was not sure if I had enough footage to prove she had been harassing me. I checked the video file, and it was only 2 minutes long. It showed her yelling, but it cut off before she made the threat to have my car towed. The next morning, I got a call from Claire. She said Bill had scheduled an emergency board meeting for that afternoon, and Melissa was trying to block it. She said Bill had sent a formal notice to all board members, and Melissa had replied saying the meeting was not valid because it did not have 72 hours notice. Bill said the bylaws allowed emergency meetings with 24 hours notice if 2 board members agreed it was an emergency. Janet had agreed, so the meeting was happening. I showed up at the clubhouse at 3 in the afternoon. Bill and Janet were already there. Melissa arrived 10 minutes late, and she looked furious. She sat down and said the meeting was a waste of time. Bill said the meeting was necessary because the board needed to address the portal access issue. Melissa said there was no issue. Bill said he and Janet had been locked out of the portal, and that was an issue. Janet said she wanted Melissa to explain why the portal logs showed deleted records requests. Melissa said there were no deleted requests. Janet pulled out a printed screenshot and handed it to Melissa. The screenshot showed a portal audit log with 3 entries marked as admin-level deletions. One of them was my records request. Melissa looked at the screenshot and said it was fake. Bill said the screenshot came from the software company, and it was not fake. He said the software company had confirmed that admin-level deletions were flagged in the system, and the flags were visible in the audit log. He said Melissa was the only person with admin access, which meant she was the only person who could have deleted the requests. Melissa stood up and said she was not going to sit there and be accused of fraud. Bill said no one was accusing her of fraud. They were asking for an explanation. She said she did not owe anyone an explanation. Janet said as board members, they had a fiduciary duty to the association, and that included transparency. Melissa said she was done with the meeting, and she walked out. Bill looked at me and said he was going to file a formal complaint with the management company. I said I was going to file a complaint with the state attorney general. Janet said she was going to resign from the board if Melissa did not step down. I said I appreciated their support, but I needed to keep pushing. That evening, I got a text from an unknown number. It said, "Stop digging or you will regret it." I took a screenshot and saved it. Then I called the police non-emergency line and reported it. The dispatcher said they would send an officer to take a report. 20 minutes later, a deputy showed up at my door. I showed him the text and explained what was happening. He said it sounded like harassment, and he would document it. He said if I got any more threats, I should call immediately. The deputy asked if I knew who sent the text. I said I had a pretty good idea, but I did not have proof. He said he could not do much without proof, but he could file a report and note the pattern of behavior. I said that was fine. He said to be careful and to let him know if anything escalated. The next day, I got an email from the management company. It said the board had voted to reinstate my amenities access, and the suspension was lifted. It also said the neutral hearing officer had been assigned, and my hearing was scheduled for the following week. I forwarded the email to Claire and told her things were moving. But Melissa was not done escalating. The day before the hearing, I came home from work and found a tow truck in my driveway. The driver was hooking up my car. I ran outside and asked what was happening. He said he had a work order to tow the vehicle for unpaid fines. I said I did not have any unpaid fines. He showed me a printed work order with my address and a fine amount of $1,200. I said the work order was fake. He said he was just doing his job, and he needed to see proof the fines were paid, or he had to tow the car. I pulled out my phone and called Claire. She answered, and I put her on speaker. She asked the driver who issued the work order. He said it came from the HOA president. She said the HOA president did not have the authority to order a tow without a board vote. He said he did not know anything about that. He just had the work order. Claire said she was a property manager, and she was telling him the work order was not valid. She said if he towed the car, the HOA would be liable for damages. The driver looked uncomfortable. He said he would call his dispatch and check. He stepped away and made a call. A few minutes later, he came back and said dispatch told him to release the vehicle. He unhooked my car and left. I called Bill and told him what had happened. He said Melissa had crossed a line, and he was going to make sure the hearing officer knew about it. I said I was going to bring it up at the hearing. He said good. The hearing was the next morning at 9. I showed up with my binder, my phone, and the printed work order from the tow truck. The hearing officer was a retired judge named Martin Cross. He had a reputation for being fair, but tough. Melissa was already there with her clipboard and her key ring. She did not look at me. Judge Cross started by explaining the process. He said he had reviewed the case file, including the original violation notice, the board meeting minutes, and the evidence I had submitted. He said he had also reviewed the complaint from the management company about the portal tampering. He said he wanted to hear from both sides, starting with Melissa. Melissa stood up and said I had violated the architectural guidelines by installing an unapproved structure. She said the trellis was an encroachment, and it had to be removed. Judge Cross asked her to define encroachment. She said it was any structure that extended beyond the property line. He asked if the trellis extended beyond the property line. She said it did. He asked for a survey. She said she did not have one. Judge Cross asked if the association had ever commissioned a survey of my property. She said no. He asked how she knew the trellis was an encroachment if there was no survey. She said it was obvious. He said obvious was not a legal standard. She said the guidelines prohibited unapproved structures. He asked which section of the guidelines. She said Section 4. He asked for a copy of the guidelines. She handed him a printed document. Judge Cross looked at the document and said it was dated 2018. He asked if there was a newer version. She said there was, but it was not in the files. He asked why it was not in the files. She said it was a technical issue. He said a technical issue that prevented the association from producing the governing documents sounded like a serious problem. She did not answer. I raised my hand, and Judge Cross nodded at me. I said I had a copy of the guidelines Melissa was referring to, and I handed him a printed page. He looked at it and said it was identical to the 2018 version. He asked Melissa if this was the updated version. She said no. He asked where the updated version was. She said it was in the portal. He said the portal showed only the 2018 version. She said that was incorrect. I pulled out my phone and opened the portal. I projected the screen onto the wall using a small projector I had brought. The screen showed the architectural guidelines section of the portal, and the only document available was the 2018 version. Judge Cross looked at Melissa and asked if she had any explanation. She said the portal was not up to date. He asked whose responsibility it was to keep the portal up to date. She said it was the board's responsibility. He said she was the board president. She said she delegated that task. Judge Cross asked who she delegated it to. She said the secretary. He asked if the secretary was present. She said no. He asked why the secretary was not present. She said the secretary was not required to attend. He said the secretary was a board member, and board members were expected to attend hearings involving governance disputes. She said she did not think it was necessary. Judge Cross looked at me and asked if I had any evidence that the trellis was not an encroachment. I said I had a survey from when I bought the house, and it showed the trellis was entirely on my property. I handed him the survey. He reviewed it and said the survey was clear. He asked Melissa if she disputed the survey. She said the survey was old. He said the survey was from 6 months ago. She said it was still not current. He said 6 months was current enough for this hearing. I took a breath, because I knew this was the moment. I pulled out my trump card. I said I had one more piece of evidence. I opened my phone and played a video. The video was from a neighbor's doorbell camera. It showed Melissa walking onto my property late at night, measuring the trellis with a tape measure and taking photos. The timestamp was 3 days before the original violation notice. I said the video proved Melissa had trespassed on my property to manufacture a violation. Judge Cross stopped the video and asked Melissa if that was her in the footage. She said she did not remember. He said the video had a clear timestamp and a clear image. He asked again if that was her. She said she might have been checking compliance. He said checking compliance did not require trespassing at night. She said she had the authority to inspect properties. He said she did not have the authority to trespass. I said I had more evidence. I pulled out the certified mail receipts from Tom Rutherford's case and the violation notices from Linda Chen's case. I said the receipts proved Melissa had been backdating notices for years, and the notices proved she was using selective enforcement to target residents who questioned her authority. I said the doorbell video proved she was willing to trespass and manufacture violations to maintain control. Judge Cross reviewed the documents. He looked at Melissa and said the evidence was damning. He said the association had a duty to enforce the covenants fairly and transparently, and the evidence suggested Melissa had violated that duty repeatedly. He said he was going to recommend the board take immediate action to address the portal access issue, the missing meeting minutes, and the pattern of selective enforcement. He also said he was going to recommend the association void all fines and fees related to my case and issue a written no-contact order prohibiting Melissa from directly interacting with me. Melissa stood up and said the hearing was a sham. Judge Cross said the hearing was fair, and she had been given every opportunity to present her side. She said she was going to appeal. He said she had the right to appeal, but the evidence was clear. She grabbed her clipboard and walked out, her key ring jangling. Judge Cross looked at me and said he was sorry I had been put through this. He said the association had serious governance issues, and he was going to recommend an independent audit of the records and the finances. He said if the audit found evidence of fraud, he would refer the matter to the state attorney general. I thanked him and said I appreciated his time. That afternoon, I got a call from Bill. He said the board had held an emergency meeting and they had voted to accept Judge Cross's recommendations. He said Melissa had resigned from the board effective immediately, and Janet had been appointed interim president. He said they were hiring a new management company to take over the portal and the records. He said it was going to take time to fix everything, but they were committed to doing it right. I asked Bill what happened to the tow truck incident. He said the board had filed a complaint against Melissa with the towing company, and the company had refunded the fee and apologized. He said the company had also agreed to require board vote authorization for any future tows. I said that was a good policy. A week later, I got a letter from the association. It said the board had voted to void all fines and fees related to my case, reinstate my amenities access, and issue a written no-contact order against Melissa. The letter also said the board was conducting an audit of the records, and they would notify residents of the findings. I saved the letter and added it to my binder. I also got a call from Tom Rutherford. He said he had heard what happened, and he was grateful I had finished what he started. He said he wished he had fought harder, but he was glad someone finally held Melissa accountable. I said I could not have done it without his evidence. He said he was glad it helped. The audit took 3 months. When the results came out, they were worse than anyone expected. The audit found that Melissa had deleted over 50 records requests, backdated more than 100 violation notices, and embezzled nearly $20,000 in HOA funds by approving fake vendor invoices and pocketing the payments. The audit also found that the missing meeting minutes were deliberately deleted to cover up votes that waived her own fines and fees. The board forwarded the audit to the state attorney general, and Melissa was charged with fraud and embezzlement. She pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 2 years probation and ordered to repay the stolen funds. The association also banned her from serving on the board or holding any HOA position in the future. The funny karma moment came when the board reviewed the records and found that Melissa had insisted on a strict 48-hour deadline for compliance notices, and the portal timestamp proved she had issued her own violation notices after the deadline had already passed. She had been enforcing a rule she herself was violating, and the system she had built to trap others had trapped her instead. The neighborhood slowly returned to normal. A neutral hearing officer was assigned to handle all future compliance disputes, so no single board member could control the appeals process. Melissa's selective enforcement tactics were documented in the meeting minutes, and the board adopted new policies to prevent future abuse. The HOA retracted the enforcement action against me in writing, along with a formal apology. I kept the binder on a shelf in my office as a reminder. Claire told me I should write a book about it. I said maybe someday. For now, I was just glad it was over. I still see Melissa around town occasionally. She does not look at me, and I do not look at her. The scarf she used to wear while yelling at me is gone, and so is the metal clipboard. She looks smaller now, like the authority she used to project was just a costume she wore to scare people. Greg stopped by one evening to thank me. He said the neighborhood felt different now, like people were not afraid to speak up anymore. He said a few residents had filed their own complaints about old violations, and the board was reviewing them. He said it felt like the community was finally healing. I thought about Tom Rutherford and Linda Chen and all the other people Melissa had targeted over the years. I thought about how close I had come to giving up, and how easy it would have been to just move like Tom did. But I did not move. I stayed, and I fought, and I won. The trellis is still on my patio. It looks exactly the same as it did the day Melissa first screamed at me about it. I added a few more plants to it, just because I could. Every time I walk past it, I remember that moment at the hearing when I played the doorbell video and watched her face go pale. I remember the sound of her keyring jangling as she stormed out of the room for the last time. I hope your fines stay at 0.